Hello, it's Marty. Welcome to presentation of the topic on agency and social struggle. This is Monday, the 6th of November, 2023, and the course is Foundations in Cultural Anthropology. So what I thought I'd do here on this first slide is put all the authors. This is pretty significant for a number of reasons. Their work is really inspiring, but also one of the struggles in anthropology, if you are informed by the decolonizing anthropology approach, is how do you consciously, with your academic work, cite scholars of color as a way to redress and address the problem of anthropology, especially the history of theory, being solely just a bunch of white dudes. So one thing to think about in your final projects is, can you articulate in the proposal, the draft document that's due this Friday, that you're going to make a conscious effort to find scholars of color? And if so, why is that important to you? Something to think about. So let's move on, and have a few other things to share with you about the projects. Hopefully, this presentation will allow you to have additional material to grab onto that you can put in your proposal. And if you haven't done it yet, I encourage you to turn this presentation off if you still have been unable to schedule with concrete times and days your interviews. Those, if you waited this long to this week, I wish you luck, and it's going to be a challenge, but we'll see if we can work through this together. So here's slide number 2, and I'm going to do my best to try to keep this presentation short, because I want to respect and honor the time that you're going to be needing to develop your proposal for this final project that's due Friday. So one of the first things is, how do people actively respond to power and create social change? So the structure of this presentation is, before every reading, I have a question like this. And so this is to guide us and hold our hand into the reading. And again, this presentation is just to augment your own reading of the material, and then give you a couple things to think about, like to consciously read strategically. So you could look at this question as something you can try to tackle in your response paper for the week. Or you could look at this more broadly and then maybe repurpose this kind of question and material from the readings, whether this one from this week or from the past, and see if it can be directly linked to the emerging project that you're developing. So pretty important, how do people actively respond to power and create social change? So there's lots of options, but hopefully you'll find in some of the readings that a question could make more sense. Or let me just go back. For individuals who are interested in this idea of doing a digital story, or even any other format, these final projects are more about you than the interviewees. So why I say that is because it's much easier to look and reflect on the inventory of your own experiences, whether these new ones that you acquired during the process of doing your final project, doing the interviews and everything else, or what you can simply do is look at the interviewees, that material you get, as informing your final project. And so if you think about any of your own practices and behavior to directly respond to power and alter that in any way and promote or foster social change, write a story. A story could simply be 400 words. And this is typically at the basis of a digital story, a personal story that responds to a story prompt that is informed by interviewees or informed by the literature, but mostly anchored into your lived experience. So if you just send me a 400-word story, I can help you develop it. And then your final project could be a video or podcast where the core of the presentation is that story that I would help you develop, and then of course help you pick images or sound effects or whatever. So that's a legitimate scholarly kind of tangible item. But let me go to these for this week. Big idea: agency and struggle. So highly unequal and repressive exercises of state violence beget a myriad forms of community resistance. Authors this week explore the ways in which people carve out autonomy, well-being, and organizing power to contest and transform their vulnerabilities. Far from treating marginalized people as mere victims, these pieces demonstrate how everyday agency shapes the world in big and small ways. So these are a couple, again, larger ideas to think about the context of these readings and some of the very specific contributions these authors are providing us. So here's a couple of learning objectives. Ideally, by the end of this week, you'll be able to conceptualize notions of human agency, resistance, and refusal. And I got to tell you that my dissertation back in, when did I finish that? 2004 in the University of California, Irvine. I actually looked at labor resistance, but also kind of this term called accommodation, where you maybe don't actively resist, but you do things to just kind of play along because either you don't have the tools or you're uninterested, or it's just you don't have the the context to resist. So typically resist at the other end of the continuum is this notion of accommodation. And accommodation is just kind of like going with the flow, maybe this philosophy of not rocking the boat or biting the hand that feeds you. But many people, in fact, if you think of your own role in the workplace or even as a student, resistance could simply be, oh, I'm not going to do the work this week, or, oh, I'm not going to read, or I'm going to write a paper that I'm just going to make stuff up. So there's different mechanisms and strategies people use to demonstrate their frustration or their dissatisfaction with certain things. And then there's this notion of refusal, which in the last article for this week is really, really, really interesting. I'm emphasizing that because the author flips the script a bit and really questions, if you look at the last paragraph, I think the last sentence, to what extent with our work as anthropologists and ethnographers can we not play a role in contributing to inequality among our participants or study participants, and maybe self-censor ourselves and refrain from telling the whole story, because we can't control other people's interpretation. And the reality is sometimes people interpret things through their own lens and then just re-stigmatize and re-stereotype people. So a very, very interesting notion of refusal in the last reading that I think is pretty fascinating, because it really forces us to rethink our role as anthropologists, and then the data we collect, and then this notion of disseminating it, and to what extent should we not disseminate certain things. And then also, hopefully, a learning objective, you're going to theorize more systematically complex relationships among state actors, non-state actors, and communities in struggle. All right, let's go to reading number one. Well, before we get to reading number one, another slide that, again, just kind of presents some of the terms that are part of the landscape of this week. Notions of agency and social struggle. A couple key ideas. There's three, excuse me. There's three key terms: human agency, and that could be unpacked further to talk about structure, resistance, and then collective agency. There's notions of social struggle and this idea of refusal by the author Simpson, which she penned the last excerpt, the last chapter for week 12. So just again, putting on the screen a couple terms that you can appropriate and apply, or what's called operationalize, in your final project. And some of this will make more sense when I get my hands on your proposals, and I could help you come up with the right questions to get the information that would either help you answer the research question you put up or the purpose of your project. But a lot of this comes down to what you give me, and then my ability to work with you and go back and forth to say, hey, great first start, but here's a couple things to go deeper. And of course, to have fun in the process. All right, so share a moment when a person stereotyped you. So this is something that you could say stigma and stereotypes make the globe turn, meaning they're everywhere. And it's challenging and tricky to provide what's called counter narratives or positive stereotypes. So in your own life, can you document in your response paper anecdote where you were stereotyped, which means someone exhibited or displayed negative behavior or discriminatory behavior against you? You know, what specifically was said? How did you feel? How did you respond? Or more specifically, what do you wish you could have said at the time, but maybe you didn't? Because some of us, like, it's hard to be really snappy and witty to come out and just really directly confront a stereotype. So these can be debilitating, as many of us know, and then they can also be countered through what I call counter stereotypes or counter narratives or positive stereotypes. So just something to get us started. And so we have the first reading from a book called Desiland by the author Shankar, a linguistic anthropologist. And as you know, one of the problems in our department in UC Denver is that we are a three-field department: biology, archaeology, or I should say biological anthropology, archaeology, cultural anthropology. And when you talk about cultural anthropology, our main focus is actually medical anthropology. And then we are missing the last piece of the puzzle for this discipline of linguistics. So this is kind of a refreshing reading, not my area of expertise, but really, really cool. This author, she's has this approach, speaking like a model minority. As you know, model minority is this term that's typically grafted onto Asians because the stereotype that, oh, they're all very smart, and so, you know, other people should like look at Asians on a pedestal to say, oh, these are like the model minority because they're again, these are just stereotypes, that they're so smart. And so then you have this phrase FOB, which is fresh off the boat. So teens in California, these are people that have come to work in Silicon Valley, and they're the kids of typically what's called unskilled workers. Even though, you know, they're doing skilled work, it's just kind of like in this setting, they're not as highly technologically advanced or highly skilled like some of the other people that have been here for generations. And so these individuals, called FOBs, fresh off the boat, they are characterized, or you can cross-cut them and analyze them along these different categories of immigration, ethnicity, class, gender. And so these individuals are stigmatized. And so the author kind of goes into how do they respond, and they creatively use this convergence of different languages, their own language, Spanish, English, to creative respond to this arena where stigma and stereotypes are like everywhere. And so she calls that linguistic play. So really interesting article, and something I encourage you to check out, and hopefully find it useful. Now, this is really, really hard for us to understand because we, in general, I'm going to make assumptions, people in this class, we belong to a state. But what does it mean to belong to, what does it mean to be stateless? In other words, to have that identification of being in this liminal phase where maybe you don't get the rights that are given to you when you're a member of a state. You don't have a passport, you don't have a license, you don't get to access facilities, and you're in this kind of tenuous position. And so what does that mean? So the author, Victoria Redcliffe, she has this section about people in Bangladesh. And the most important thing is looking at individuals who are disenfranchised, and as anthropologists or researchers, not grafting onto people who are vulnerable, that these people don't have agency. And so just being very careful, like, oh, just because, for example, you see unhoused people, or you see you know, the stereotypical like disenfranchised communities, people who maybe are suffering from environmental racism and have struggles with you know, the natural environment around them because of a factory nearby. So with these kinds of populations, anthropologists sometimes have a knee-jerk reaction where we look at them as just poor and vulnerable and not having agency. And so this author really goes through in a short a couple pages about how individuals in a camp, that this camp is a political space, and that people, even though they're disempowered, they do have agency. And so some of this work came out of a conference, and thinking through your own work, how do you set aside this presumption of like, oh, individuals who are disempowered or vulnerable, that they don't have agency? So hope you find it interesting. A lot of complex material, but super, super fascinating in terms of like, putting yourself in a person's shoes who are refugees, and then how do they cope and handle and manage given the difficult circumstances. And then, of course, what are the mechanisms to ensure that they have paths to citizenship or to being part of a state, if that's the goal for individuals. Now, another one, which I think is super interesting and very, very fashion forward, especially for those of you like me that spend hours on your phone, is share a hashtag that is meaningful to you. That's number one. So again, these are just little kind of nuggets that you can throw into your response paper if it makes sense. So I'm just giving you a few things to latch on to as you begin to tackle the paper for this week. And then, of course, what is hashtag ethnography? The author that I'm going to introduce, which you maybe have read by now, goes through Ferguson and some of the stuff that happened in the media scape, or the landscape where social media is circulated about this killing of this individual. And so hashtag ethnography is this approach where, you look at cyberspace or the internet, especially this arena where hashtags are circulated, as a window to understand culture. And so it's pretty cool. You can do it in your pajamas at home on your computer or on your phone, but you can systematically organize a project that says, I'm going to latch on to this or that hashtag, and I'm going to go through and, let's say, whatever from I'm just suggesting like parameters, because you have to have control or keep it manageable, a project. You can say from, let's say the Palestine-Israel issue going on right now, you can say from the beginning of this incident that happened recently in late October until, let's say, today, you want to go through hashtags and kind of compare and contrast what has been said, or the different positions, or whatever. So there's really cool things you can do. And then, of course, what are the limitations? And so historically, people would say the strength of anthropology is like that human connection you get when you're with someone in person talking with them. But nowadays, pretty much anything goes if you can justify it and then anchor it in literature and have something new and interesting to share, and hopefully contributing new knowledge. So this is pretty cool. So I'd be interested, is there a hashtag that's meaningful for you that you use a lot? And then, of course, is hashtag ethnography something potentially that you want to apply in your project for this class? All right, so the authors Bonilla and Rosa. So you have a section from them about the murder of Michael Brown in Missouri. You have these different kind of arenas of discourse. You have official state discourse, like, for example, from the police department, from the authorities, and then you have the unofficial social media discourse. And so those two contrast very sharply. And so the authors kind of go into that. And then there's this idea of how do you democratize, when you look at social media, how do you democratize socio-political narratives using hashtags? So check it out. It's pretty cool, super interesting, and a really good model of what you can do with a particular issue that you're fond of, or that's important, and then that you want to go deeper into, maybe in the context of this course, or even in the future. All right, here's a big issue. What is settler colonialism? Again, this is just a phrase or a question that is a link to the final reading for this week. And it's pretty significant because in some way we're living on occupied land. And so we are currently participants of settler colonialism. And so if you think about the history of our country and social groups who have been forcibly removed from their land because of people, a different kind of people having more power through violence or other means. And then now there's this resurgence of not just land back, like giving land back, but giving everything back. And so settler colonialism is something that exists today. It's an important analytical tool, and it's something I encourage people to read more about and hopefully find a little more understanding through this reading by the author Simpson. You have this book of hers called Mohawk Interruptus, Political Life Across the Borders of Settler States. And then you have this notion of ethnographic refusal, and then also political refusal. So these are things the author talks about in her very brief write-up or excerpt from this book. And the bottom line for me is, to what extent are we as anthropologists, or you as individuals with the projects that you're going to develop, to what extent are you being complicit in the subordination of yourselves and others? And so really thinking carefully, what is our role? Why are we doing this in the first place? And then can we apply this notion of ethnographic refusal and look at what it means in the context of doing a research project for a class? So all under the rubric of this idea of settler colonialism. So again, lots of super interesting stuff that is pretty heavy, because we're talking about resources that have been taken away from people, and we're talking about when you think of your role in our discipline, quite simply, what do you bring to the table? What are the either conceptual tools, or what are the remedies to some of these issues that we're talking about? And again, anthropology doesn't have all the answers, but we can at least try, because in the safe space of a university course, we can come up with really innovative and maybe approaches that haven't been tried yet to try to directly confront some of this stuff that keeps people down. All right, key takeaways. Number one, state power is never absolute, but always contested. So many of us, me included, go through our lives and maybe don't engage in a lot of the forces of coercion that exist at the state level, but there's always contestation. There's people confronting them, trying to alter power relations to ensure that people can live, a decent life. Bullet point 2, agency is the capacity to exert one's will and is differentially empowered or constrained by structure, even as human agency creates and maintains social structures. So this is kind of a pretty profound statement. And one of the issues that comes up is, to what extent can we individually and collectively alter or dismantle the structures that prevent us from fulfilling our agency, or making sure our agency is manifested. And at the bottom here, bullet point 3, sometimes collective agency against the state manifests as social struggle. So if you think of your own life, what is one social struggle that, for example, keeps you up at night, or that is something that you devote your time to? So I'd be interested if any of these things appeal to you, that you want to write up or put into front and center of your final project. And this slide is 2 parts. I'm going to go through these questions that relate to this week's readings. These may be helpful for you, but then I also want to make a comment and provide a alternative way for you to spend your time this week related to response paper for week 12. All right, authors in week 12 conceptualize practices ranging from linguistic humor to organized political resistance. What are the advantages and limitations of theorizing such diverse practices together as responses to power? When and how does response become resistance? How is human agency understood by these scholars, even implicitly? What sorts of behaviors constitute agency? Does agency necessarily entail opposition to state power? Bonilla and Rosa and Simpson comment on the political position of anthropologists who work with people in struggle. Sorry. In what ways do their insights build on and advance earlier essays on native and advocacy anthropology? Okay, you have in this PowerPoint presentation in my lecture, I think 16 slides, a lot of material that just kind of help you ease your way into the readings for the week. But I also want to offer to you, this is, I believe, I think I'm right, this is the last response paper. So if you want, you can just push aside the response paper and at least with one of these terms from this week in a systematic and creative way, integrate it into your proposal as part of the bedrock, the framework, and expand on it accordingly with definitions, one or two citations, how it's relevant to your topic, and what contributions it's going to make, or do you think it's going to make to your work. And then that would be something you just tie into your proposal that's due this week. And then that would be in lieu of or instead of a response paper. And this comment of mine made me nothing if we're done with the response papers. I actually forgot. I've been so busy doing other stuff. But that's it for me. And looking forward to your proposals. The turnaround is going to be really quick. I'll get them, as you know, get them to me by Friday night, and I'll work on them this weekend. And you'll get comments from me before our one-on-one consultations. That sound groovy? All right, man. Hope everything is well. And we're almost done. Now we're pretty much just shifting big time to these projects. It's the 6th of November, and these projects will be done in the can by the second week, I believe, of December. So you have over 30 days. And I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with and how we can all learn from each other.